So thank you all because everyone was so easy to get to come over that we are ahead of schedule, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing. So I am Tara Dowdell of the Tara Dowdell Group, and we are proud to partner with the Fund for New Jersey. And it is my pleasure to introduce Thelma Carrera. So Thelma is the program manager for the Princeton School. Wait, let me make sure I get this absolutely correct. The Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. But I want to say something about Thelma Carrera because she has been such a tremendous partner in this project and getting this event going. So I just really want to give her a huge shout out because there was no one more responsive, no one more professional than Thelma Carrera. So we really want to thank her for her partnership and helping us execute this event. And so without any further ado, I want to bring up Thelma Carrera.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. I'm excited to welcome you to Princeton University for what will be a thoughtful, engaging, and motivating discussion on the future of housing and education here in the Garden State. We are proud to host such a timely and necessary conversation ahead of next month's election with partners from across the state and this evening's wonderful convener, the Fund for New Jersey. Thank you for making the trip and being here with us tonight. My name is Thelma Carrera, and I'm the program manager of SPIA New Jersey, a program out of the School of Public and International Affairs. At the urging of our students, Dean Amani Jamal established SPIA New Jersey for almost 3 years ago to serve as a public policy convener, partner, and lab for the campus community to explore new ideas at the state and local levels. We know Princeton University is not only in New Jersey, but of it. We work with organizations across the state and the nation, like the Fund, to bring fresh perspectives, research, energy, opportunities, and experiences to campus. Education and housing are often talked about separately, but evidence shows that they are deeply connected. Where someone lives shapes so much of their experience. The schools they attend, the opportunities they have access to, and even their sense of stability and belonging. As we look to the future, these connections only grow more urgent. Today's event brings together an incredible range of expertise, from our panelists to all of you. Each of you brings something valuable to this conversation, and we hope this space allows for real learning, exchange, and maybe even some unexpected insights. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Brandon McCoy, President of the Fund for New Jersey. Brandon, Brandon is a widely respected leader in public policy, both here in New Jersey and nationally. Before his current role, he served in Washington, D.C. as Vice President for State Partnerships and co-leader of the State Fiscal Policy Division at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. Many of you may also know Brandon from his time at New Jersey Policy Perspective, where he spent 7 years in roles ranging from policy analyst to president. During that time, he helped shape policies on issues such as minimum wage, paid sick leave, equitable taxation, public budgets, and cannabis legalization. Please join me in welcoming Brandon McCoy.
Good evening, y'all. Can you hear me? Good. Can you give another round of applause for Thelma, please? Thank you. Thelma's been a joy to work with, not just for this event, but many events that we've had over the last couple of years here with Princeton. And for those of you who have been involved in event coordination whatsoever, you know that is not easy. So thank you, Thelma. Thank you to the team here at SPIA for making this as easy as it could be. And good evening, and thank you to all of you for attending. As Thelma mentioned, I'm Brandon McCoy. I'm the president of the Fund for New Jersey. And on behalf of the fund, I welcome you to the future of housing and education in New Jersey. We are deeply grateful to our partner here at SPIA, and also to all of you for joining us this evening. We're honored to be joined by community leaders, advocates, policy experts, and residents from across the state. We actually had our last event in Camden, and we had people come from Jersey City to Camden That never happens. So we're really, really thrilled to have people from all across the state join us for a very important conversation about, how do we build a more just, sustainable, and equitable New Jersey? And so from the widening housing affordability gap and aging school infrastructure to disparities in educational resources and neighborhood investment, New Jersey is confronting urgent housing and educational challenges that are just not theoretical at all. They are real and they are present in our daily lives. But with these challenges, of course, comes extraordinary opportunity. Opportunities to reimagine how we invest in housing and education, to center community-driven solutions that make neighborhoods more affordable, equitable, and resilient, to build schools that meet the needs of every learner and communities where families can thrive. And also to ensure that the access to quality housing and education is not a privilege, but a promise that's fulfilled for every resident across our state, especially given that our Constitution guarantees quality education and quality housing, so not a small thing. This is a moment that calls for fearless leadership, for bold vision, and collaborative action. And that's why we're here, to explore what's next and to ensure that the solutions that we pursue reflect the lived experiences of New Jerseyans across all walks of life. So tonight marks the final conversation in our Crossroads New Jersey 2025 series. And it was a 4-part initiative that was launched by the fund to convene critical dialogue in the lead up to our state's gubernatorial election this November 4th, remember? And before you leave, I encourage you to stop by the registration table or visit the fund's website to explore additional resources and learn more about the issues that we have covered. Tonight's panel brings together leaders who have been doing the work in organizing and advocating and innovating in affordable housing, education equity, and responsible land use. These are folks that I've had the tremendous pleasure of working with and learning from for decades at this point. Folks that were mentors of mine when I first started, folks that I worked with when I was at the Center on Budget, and folks that I've had the distinct pleasure of supporting in my current role. So it's a really tremendous panel of people who really know their stuff. And so please listen intently, ask questions, share your ideas, because the future that we're talking about today belongs to all of us, right? And it will take all of us to bring it to life. So to help frame tonight's discussion, we are honored actually to share a special message from U.S. Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman. In her video remarks, Congresswoman Watson-Coleman will reflect on what's at stake, not just for public policy, but for generations to come. So let's hear from her, and let me not mess this up.
Good evening. Thank you to the Fund for New Jersey for hosting this discussion tonight, and to Princeton University for opening its doors to us. Tonight's conversation is about 2 of the most fundamental building blocks of opportunity: housing and education. And how those choices we make today will shape the future of our great state. I've spent much of my career working on these issues. I've seen how housing policy determines whether families can thrive, and education policy can be the difference between healthy, successful students and those whose God-given gifts and talents are squandered instead. During my time at the Department of Community Affairs and later in the state legislature, I saw firsthand how housing stability is more than just an important social determinant of health. Creating safe and affordable housing stimulates the local economy, it creates jobs, and invests in the economic development that benefits everyone in that community. We must do everything we can to make the American dream possible for everyone. It's why I've led efforts like the Bipartisan Helper Act, which would make it easier for teachers and first responders to buy homes in the communities that they serve. That's just one example of how much good we can do when we put partisanship aside and we do right by Americans who are doing more than their part. Because when we secure stable housing, we secure stronger, safer communities with more supportive schools and healthier families. Education is just as essential. Every child in New Jersey and across the country deserves to go to school in an inclusive, safe, and engaging environment that nurtures their potential and prepares them for the future. That means fighting back against book bans and anti-DEI policies that attempt to erase American history from public schools. It means dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline through the Ending Push-Out Act and supporting school-based mental health programs so children can learn with dignity and joy. It means passing legislation like my Black History Matters Act, which recognizes that Black history is American history and ensures comprehensive Black history lessons. We should be very proud that New Jersey is one of the states that require Black history to be taught in primary and secondary schools, but considering the disdain for inclusivity and truth that the current administration has shown, and what is on the ballot in November here, we should know better than to take that for granted. As New Jersey's sole appropriator in Congress, I've delivered funding for community learning spaces like libraries and community centers, the local YMCA, and various programs that are committed to youth mentorship and technology initiatives. Each project might just be a line item for Congress, but in New Jersey, they impact thousands of families and change countless lives for the better. My ask tonight is simple. Let's get to work defending the pillars of every functioning society, housing and education. Let's invest in affordable housing enforcement and in the next generation of inclusive schools. Let's resist the erasure of history and the erosion of equity. And let's build coalitions that keep policy grounded in the lived experiences of our families and our children. That is how we secure the future of New Jersey. I'm so grateful to be a part of this conversation. I thank you for your commitment to doing the work alongside me. May God continue to bless you and the work that you do.
So thank you very much so to the Congresswoman for those remarks and to her office for providing them to us. They really remind us exactly why we're here. Y'all see what's happening in Chicago. Y'all see what's happening in LA. Y'all know what's happening in DC. And there's no reason for those things to not happen here, right? And so as we think about what we do as a community and what community means and what investments we make and what policies we fight for, these things are not academic, even though we're in a tremendous academic institution. These things are very real. And so the folks that are on this panel are fighting the good fight every single day. Is often very thankless work, is often long hours and tireless, sleepless evenings, but they really understand what's at stake and they know what they're talking about. So please give them your undivided attention, and y'all start walking up while I introduce you, because it's a bit of a walk. But we have Peggy Bailey, who is the Executive Vice President for Policy and Program Development at the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities in Washington, D.C. We have Dr. Jesely De La Cruz, who is the Executive Director of the Latino Action Network Foundation. We have Robert Kim, who is the Executive Director of the Education Law Center. We have Adam Gordon, who is the Executive Director of the Fair Share Housing Center. And our absolute fearless moderator for the evening, we have Stacy Berger, who's the President and CEO of the Housing and Community Development Network of New Jersey. Thank you all, and I'll let you take it away. Okay.
Did I turn it off? Did I turn? There we go, we're on. We're live. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. Give yourselves a big round of applause. It's October, it's Eventorama, and you made it out to the most important conversation we're going to have for a while on these topics. They are really the building blocks of as the Congresswoman said, I couldn't say it any better than Bonnie Watson-Coleman. They're the building blocks of a functioning civil society, and we are in the fight for that civil society right now. What's happening in Chicago, what's happening in Portland, what's happening in LA, what happened in Newark in May, right? I mean, there are real, very serious threats to our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And the way that we are able to make sure that people have the resources and the social safety net that they need and deserve is to make sure that we are engaged, informed, and that we're able to share the work that people are doing with each other. So I apologize to these folks because I feel like I'm putting my back to some people, and I don't want to do that, so I'm going to scooch back a little bit. So with us tonight are some of the smartest people I know, so I got the easy job because I get to ask them questions, but they have to answer them. And then you're all going to get to ask them some questions too. So it's really, we didn't actually pick an order, so I'm going to just start with my friend Peggy at the end and work my way this way, and then we'll go back and forth as we talk a little bit about what's happening in education and housing. And I was hoping Peggy could set the stage for us. I was hoping she was going to bring good news from Washington, that things had calmed down and we were back to having some sort of functioning government.
But
on our way up, she actually shared some distressing news that things might be going on a little bit longer. So can you tell us a little bit about what you see, in the future of budget work and how you think the budget impasse and is going to, maybe if you have if you want to make predictions, you're welcome to, but if you could tell us a little bit about what you see on the horizon at the federal level for both education and housing.
Sure, thanks, Stacy.
Small.
Yeah, just small. So it's great to be here. It's great to be in New Jersey and with all of you. And really seeing all of you is what helps give me energy that yes, people are paying attention, people care. I need to keep doing this work because there's a community that is going to engage in the fights ahead, the fights today, the fights ahead. And so I'm so excited to be here tonight. And I'm saying a lot of that, I'm going to say as much bad news as there is, but with a smile, so that hopefully it helps ease a little bit. It is hard to know exactly what's going to happen, but just to, set the stage, right? We're in this government shutdown. It is hard to know how this is all going to play out at the end. There is a lot of small ball politics and big ball politics that's happening all at the same time. And there's a lot that's happening in using the shutdown as an excuse to carry out some of the things that we had already been seeing before the shutdown started. We were talking at the reception about how we can't even put our phones away on a Friday night just to have a glass of wine and a break from the news because things like last Friday happened where we find out news at 7 p.m. that so many government agencies have been further cut and practically laid bare to not be able to function. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that in the education space in particular. But I have a cousin that works at the CDC, and most of her friends are at extra threat of losing their job. So that's what's important to know, is a lot of those the things that are happening of especially in this category of reductions in force and all of that, some of it is illegal, and a lot of it, and most of it has been part of the plan. Not just part of the plan since January 20th, but part of the plan if we all go back to thinking about Project 2025, like this is part of the plan. So we need to stay singularly focused on that this isn't whether it's shut down or not shut down. This was part of the plan, and keep laying out the evidence that this is part of the plan and the dismantling that's happening. And when we get to the shutdown, obviously, first, it is really important to say that regardless of how we feel about how Democrats should be standing up or the role that Republicans are playing, shutdowns are not good, right? There are people that are being hurt. There's funding that's not happening. There are families that have federal workers in them that are really concerned about whether they're going to be able to pay their mortgage or their rent. They may get paid later, but they need that money today. So I just want to make sure that is really clear. But Democrats feel like that pain is is part of is part of a larger pain that folks are going to be feeling as we lose health insurance, as we lose access to food, as states have to take on more of that burden of trying to pay those costs. And right now, the Republicans are mostly staying home, and there's not a conversation happening back and forth about how are we going to get to some sort of agreement that's going to reopen the government. So that's why it's unclear how this plays out to the end. Part of what I do in my job is try to play out the puzzle pieces to the end to understand what's going to move, and this is unprecedented where we're at right now, where there's not even conversations happening back and forth. And so what does that mean for housing or education is unclear, right? We know that we just don't know how things are going to get restarted. So what we're trying to do at the Center on Budget in particular is to be able to tell this bigger story about what is happening is part of a larger plan of disinvesting in government, not seeing the value of what the government brings, and a lot of it happening under the guise of demonizing poor people and otherizing everybody else. And that exercise and mission of many of folks who are in DC and across the country is what the real story is about, and not these other actions that they might try to use excuses for of what and trying to get all of us to just stop paying attention. So the key part for all of us is to fight against that, right? Is to pay attention and be engaged and call out the harm that's happening across the country, and explaining, for us at least, why otherizing and the racism and anti-LGBTQ and all of those issues of creating an us and them is only going to make us weaker as a country, instead of leaning into the strengths we have of the diversity that we have in the country. So, I don't have a crystal ball of how this is going to end, but we have to stay focused on the singular mission of making sure that people have a right to health care, that people have a right to housing, that people who are in poverty, it is not their fault. It is a structure, it is a policy choice that we have all made to not invest in the things that we know work, and not expect more of the institutions in this country to pay people how much they're worth, to be able to invest in people broadly in order to build the foundation that we need. Instead, we have not been doing that, and so we have to lean into that charge of what people need and what we should be demanding of institutions, and not excusing them and then trying to stay in our bubble and hold our own little house together.
Thank you. There we go. The mic, I'm not sure. Is that better? Nope. There we go. Yeah, I think it takes a second. I'm not a patient person, and I would like my microphone to work instantly, the way I want my health care, right away, right? So to Dr. Dela Cruz, tell us a little bit about what you see on the state level around education and housing. And we've had the pleasure and opportunity to work together on a number of issues, and it's really, I think the work that the Latino Action Network Foundation does is singularly in this space to really have a deep impact in this moment because of all of the attacks on our immigrant population, on our Latino neighbors and families and friends. And so between I don't want to call it offensive, but the work that you're doing to advance people's ability to access healthcare and housing and education, how do you see the future of the state policy? How do you see the future of state policy in those areas right now?
Yeah, to me, the state policy is the opportunity, is how we've been seeing it, which is why our focus at the Latino Action Network Foundation has been primarily on state policy. around housing and education, and we don't really do any work really federally. But I have to say, when I first started this job and in this role at the Latino Action Network in 2018, 2017, I used to talk about anti-Latino discrimination. That's like a presentation I used to go out and do about anti-Latino discrimination, and people would actually look at me and be like, is that real? And so now it's been 8.5 years later, and I think we can all accept that it's real, right? That anti-Latino discrimination is not a term we're making up. It's very clear in terms of history in the United States, particularly around education and housing. Maybe the invisible, like we've been made to be a community that's invisible, right? By racially ambiguous, kind of labeled as white by the federal government, but not really having fully the lived experience of white body privilege, so to me, I'm not surprised by anything that's happened federally, because I've been living this as a person, a child of immigrants, since the 80s, right? So I'm very, very connected to it. It's just at a very violent level right now. So in terms of us, the work that we do, we have this relationship. Actually, these are two of my favorite lawyers right here, right next to us.
Say she brought her legal team.
We brought our legal team because, believe it or not, there are no lawyers at the Latino Action Network Foundation. We are actually all community folks, people with lived experience, New Jersey residents who have a personal connection to being Latino or immigrant or both, or Afro-Latino, and feel the power to use our voice to shape the space. So first I'm gonna say, all of my facts and all of my statistics are specifically to Latino populations today. So in an effort towards the resistance of this, I'm specifically focusing on Latino communities. And I'm gonna say it in English because I know everybody's practicing their Spanish. Me imagino que ya están practicando for the Super Bowl.
We have 3.5.
Everybody's got their Duolingo. I don't know how many. I'm not gonna test you all and go blown into Spanish, but I can, because that is a lot of the work that we do, is go out into the community, providing bilingual education around housing resources, education resources statewide. We do a lot of statewide advocacy around the legislative budget to get funds to go into different communities throughout the state, essentially so that we have a network of what's happening on the ground and ways that in real time we can help people. So really from our Hispanic Women's Resource Centers or our canvassing with the New Jersey Million Voters Project, the number one issue that we hear from communities is always housing, right? That's the one issue: affordable housing, lack of affordable housing, lack of safe housing. Regularly I meet women from the centers, and recently I met a woman and she was part of our advocacy training. She's a graduate of the Hispanic Women's Resource Centers, took ESL classes, civics classes, married, mother of 6 children, lives in a 1-bedroom with her husband, works. Her and her husband both work. They have 6 kids, and they live in a 1-bedroom in a 3-bedroom house with 2 other families, right? And our community is not asking for luxury. They're asking for dignity, stability, and affordability. And that's the work that we try to do here on state policy, and that's why we were really big advocates around codifying Mount Laurel Doctrine, because we saw this as an opportunity not for subsidized housing, but for a way for every municipality to make sure that they provide opportunities for all socioeconomic classes to live in that town. So like my board chair says, if you can garden there and you can landscape there, you can live there. You should be able to live in that community as well.
Frank Fryer, ladies and gentlemen.
Right? Yeah. And your kids should be able to go to school there as well. So that's really the work that we try to do, and we lift up. So we work like bi-directional in community up to inform policy, but then leveraging our statewide collective power statewide to let them know really what's happening on the grounds. Because we can play politics all day until I start telling you facts about how housing and school districts are tied to your mortality, right? And how long you actually live. So yeah, that's really the work that we're committed to.
Thank you, Jesselie. We didn't plan out this seating arrangement, but we're going to turn next to Bob, Robert Kim from the Education Law Center, so we can talk about education. And I do think it's important to just highlight what Jesselie just said, which is the social determinants of health. Your life expectancy and the quality of your health during that time is directly tied to where you live. People in Princeton, in this zip code live 7 years longer than people in Trenton 6, 8, 10 miles away, right? And so that is not an accident, that is by design, and that land use and the 400 years of segregation that led to those land use decisions, right, have impacted how our schools are operating. And how they should be operating is a subject of some legal debate. And so if you would like to, Bob, tell us a little bit about what you're seeing, at the state level around education policy, if you could.
Sure. Thank you, Stacy. And first of all, thank you to Brandon and the fund, and thank you to Princeton for having us, and thank you all of you for coming. It's a pleasure to be here, especially with these three panelists. It's a really rich opportunity, I think, for us to kind of learn together and share what's going on. I think, I'll try to be brief about this. I think that it's just an extraordinary landscape for education in this country right now and in New Jersey. We have the Trump administration, which is doing unprecedented damage to education in this country in ways that nobody could have foreseen how dramatic the maneuvers could have been that have actually happened over the last 8 or 9 months, even with the Project 2025 playbook calling for the elimination of Title I, block granting of IDEA, and returning education to the states, whatever that actually means, because education already is in the states. So we have that going on, and much more to say about what we're doing to kind of counter those efforts right now to resist. But then also we have New Jersey, which is very unique in its education history, its advocacy history around education. And so we, for the moment, are in, I would say, a place of some satisfaction of civil rights guarantees for high quality public education in New Jersey, but we also have the prospect of greater uncertainty and instability. We have a very monumental election coming up where the candidates have very different views on education and what should be provided to students in this country, in this state. So I will say that it's a very precarious time when combined with the actions of this federal administration and the uncertainty around the future in New Jersey. Having said that, we have some progress in New Jersey right now around school funding. My organization is in that 40-year struggle with the Abbott litigation. I think we've, our number of times to the Supreme Court rivals the Super Bowl. I mean, I think we're up there. The Roman numerals are really up there. We've been there long, many times to ensure equitable funding equity between low-income and wealthier school districts in the state of New Jersey. So we finally have full funding after many decades of struggle under this current formula, thanks to the current governor. We have, there's been some bumps in the last budget negotiations. We've, have some fixes and some stability for districts and to ride out these fluctuations, to ensure special ed funding is stabilized, and to lift property tax caps that will enable districts under adequacy to obtain local funding for their schools. So those things are okay in that regard, but uncertain in the future, because we need to make permanent some of these fixes in the school funding formula. We need to reimagine what we need to provide for New Jersey students under this Constitution around what we actually need for students in terms of their mental health needs that have skyrocketed, in terms of their academic needs we couldn't have foreseen 25 years ago around climate change, around the real need to have civic engagement in a country that's becoming increasingly polarized, in the way that we need to address online addiction among our students and the rise of the internet and its impact on students' brains. These are just a few of the things that we couldn't have imagined when the school funding formula in New Jersey was devised a quarter century ago, or more than 20 years ago. So we need to have a future where school funding is not only stabilized and increased, frankly, but recalibrated to meet the needs of students in the second quarter of the 21st century. We also know that our preschool program in New Jersey is, we're one of the few states where preschool is a constitutional right, according to our Supreme Court, along with K-12 education. So we need that to continue, and for there to be address the fact that even though we do have a right to pre-K in our schools, that the enrollments are down since the pandemic. So we need to have a way to address the fact that even with provisions and legislation to provide for pre-K without charge, that there are societal factors depressing enrollment rates. So that needs to be fixed. Our school facilities are crumbling. We need billions of dollars, both in the Abbott districts or the SDA districts and in the regular operating districts, to shore up facilities and modernize them for the 21st century in terms of the facilities that kids really need to learn. So all of these things are developments that are going well in New Jersey. We haven't mentioned a few other topics around segregation. I hope we talk about segregation.
We're going to get to that.
In New Jersey, we'll get to that. And civil rights. And New Jersey has historically been a beacon for protecting the civil rights and ensuring equity and equality for students. And these are things that we need to continue to work on and shore up, particularly because, back to the federal government, there are specific extraordinary efforts to target particular student populations for disfavored treatment. And that conduct by the federal government is unlawful under any constitution, under the US Constitution and under New Jersey's Constitution. It's absolutely unlawful what they are doing right now. And wielding civil rights laws in a way that is 100% counter to the purpose of those civil rights laws.
Right. Everything is upside down, right? It feels like everything is backwards, and being the tools that we have all organized for our most of our lives, right, are now being deployed against us. And
It's because it was working.
right, that's right. This is it feels to me like the post-Reconstruction period, right? In a second Reconstruction. So thank you, Bob. We're going to come back to that. We're going to talk specifically about the lawsuit in a minute. Speaking of segregation, and someone who has spent the entire time that I have known him, which is quite a few years now, Adam Gordon and the great team at Fair Share Housing Center works tirelessly to end housing segregation and is the only organization in New Jersey dedicated solely to the protection of Mount Laurel, which is the outside of Brown versus the Board of Ed, probably the single largest civil rights ruling in American history. So you want to talk a little bit about what you see as the future of the state of New Jersey and housing policy and segregation? You've just had a very large victory last year with A4S50, so
yeah.
Tell the folks about it.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you, Brandon and the fund and Princeton. It's always funny for me to speak at the university because I grew up in South Brunswick and I was like one of those like towny kids running around, definitely not part of the university community. So, it's what we hear. I mean, housing is so much on the center of everyone's minds right now because it's just a situation that's intolerable. Like what Jess Lee, who's on our board, along with Calandra, who's also here, another one of our board members. It is just front and center for some people's minds because it's gotten to the point where people are in totally intolerable situations that disproportionately falls on Black and brown New Jerseyans, as it always has for decades. But the stakes have gotten higher and the situation has gotten worse. And we have had tremendous victories, but we also are up against people who are pushing back in tremendous ways. So I'll talk a little bit about the victories, and then I'll talk about the challenges that we face and why is it that things are so bad, and why so many people in New Jersey are spending 50-60% of their paycheck for housing, and often for like crap housing, right? It's not even like the decent housing that like it's not super fancy, but it's okay. It's like you're spending like half your paycheck to live in a bedroom somewhere, right? And but we come from a history of tremendous organizing, and organizing combined with legal action through this, and it's always been the case. Fair Share turned 50 years this year because it's 50 years since the original Mount Laurel decision. That came out of organizing in the Black community in Mount Laurel, in the Puerto Rican community in Camden, and to fight against practices that were trying to displace those communities, that were trying to segregate our state. Because we have this rich history in New Jersey. People forget we're just above the Mason-Dixon line, and so much, especially in central and southern New Jersey, have these long-standing Black communities that were formed from the Underground Railroad. There's these long, deep history, especially in the Puerto Rican community, and as it's been expanded to many other communities since that time, that is so deep-rooted here for many decades. But what happened in Mount Laurel is, as the town was suburbanizing, the town leaders said, literally, if you people can't afford to live in our town, you'll just have to leave, and tried to displace the long-standing Black community that had been there, that had the oldest AME church in the state, Jacob's Chapel AME Church, where we celebrated the 50th anniversary earlier this year. They fought back. Our founders fought back and fought all the way to the New Jersey Supreme Court with organizing integral every step of the way, and established that every town has to allow for its fair share. And it's been a fight ever since, and it's a fight today. But we, with so many of the people in this room, on the stage, all collaboratively working together, got past the most significant overhaul of Mount Laurel, that to really establish it really strongly in law after a huge fight last year, A4S50, and that is now being implemented and playing out throughout the state, and we're hoping, the last overall we got through the courts by fighting Chris Christie created over 25,000 new affordable homes, and we are on track to create even more than that over the next decade if we keep making this forward progress. But we have real obstacles. We have mayors fighting back. We certainly have some people running for office right now who are pushing back. And we've had that before, and we're going to keep fighting, and we've won, but it's only through the collective action of all of us organizing together and fighting together. And we have these broader trends. I think that while we're making this progress, there's really three things that are pushing the housing market to be worse and worse. One is we're not building enough housing, and that's the one that I think gets the most attention nationally, and there's a lot of talk about that, and it's true. We're just not building enough housing in total, and so what happens is that pushes everything down. I remember talking to Mayor Baraka about this, and part of his point is like when Millburn doesn't build enough housing, like the kids who grew up middle class in Millburn come into Newark and they gentrify Newark because they're like, well, I can't afford to live in Millburn anymore, and so now I'm going to go into Newark, and that's cheaper for them, but it's still not what people in Newark can afford, and it leads to displacing longtime residents in Newark. And so that's part of why it's important to build new housing everywhere. But it's not only that, it's that the housing market has changed in really fundamental ways. We have collusion among landlords to fix prices. We have competition. It used to be that if you were going to buy a single family home, your competition was other families who want to buy that home. Now it might be a private equity firm, Blackstone or something like that, and that drives prices up, and it's unfair to families trying to get in the market. And the last thing is that we're not funding. This is the big fight we're having, and Stacey is leading. We're not providing enough funding to create or preserve affordable housing, and that's certainly a huge problem on the federal level, and it's a problem on the state level, where we slashed, our state slashed the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and that's a big fight we're going to have both in lame duck and for the next governor. And those are the three big things that we need to push against in order to create more housing.
Looks like she's ready to jump in. Go ahead.
Just to add to that, though, I think in the housing world, we don't talk enough about the affordability part just for people that don't make enough money to be able to afford the minimal housing. So I would just add that fourth bucket of of the affordability and being able to fill in the income gap, whether it's fighting for a living wage, fighting for more rental subsidy, fighting for housing that's built at a lower income scale. But I just think that we, as housers, we always blame housing for the problem, but I really think it's important for us to expand to think about the income that families are lacking to be able to pay for housing. Jenny Schutz, who was at Brookings and now is at Arnold, wrote the book Fixer Upper, and chapter 4 of that book is really important to read. It's short, and she explains, right, how much housing costs. You know, we get angry at landlords and property owners, but in a capitalist structure, they need to be able to make at least a little bit of profit and make enough money to reinvest into the housing, and even at a minimal cost, there are just too many people that don't make enough money to be able to afford that minimal cost. And we've seen in public housing what happens when we don't invest in the sustainability, maintenance, operating of the housing. We have to be able to invest in that, and paying rent at a market rate that keeps increasing is really important. And so I just wanted to add that income piece is so important, and we can't, for too long in the housing world, we've just left that for others to fight for people to have more money.
Moderator privilege, quick quiz. Who knows, well, let me phrase it this way. Who believes that everyone who needs housing rental assistance gets it? If you believe that is something that, if you like TANF or food programs, if you need food stamps and food assistance, everybody gets that, right? Does everybody know? No, well, if you're eligible, you get it. But in New Jersey and around the country, only 25%, right? 25% of folks who need rental assistance. I was going to do a poll, but I couldn't figure out how to make that easy. So really part of the problem is that the federal government does not provide rental assistance for 75% of the families and people who need help paying their rent, which means that they expect the states to pick up some portion of that, which the state of New Jersey is certainly not able to do and not interested in doing, and hasn't, except by taking money from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. So we're taking money to pay for production, which would create more homes, to pay for rental assistance, when we know that we need to provide more rental assistance, and we need to tie it to the actual cost of doing business and paying for that. So I just want to always make sure people know that. Somebody called me yesterday and said, I have a homeless person that's reached out to me, can you help them get a rental voucher? I was like, I would love to.
Here's the line.
I was like, but people don't know. They don't know. They don't understand that is not an automatic thing, that if you qualify for rental assistance, that you actually get rental assistance, never mind being able to find an apartment. So I will stop talking. But I wanted to go back to the education lawsuit and ask Bob and Jessley to talk a little bit about where you see that headed, and how if you've been at the Supreme Court for 40 years, how do you feel about your chances? I mean, what do you think that is going to happen with the lawsuit and how it's going to proceed? You want to tell folks a little bit about it?
Well, maybe I'll start and just talk about the lawsuit in general terms, and then where we're at, and then invite Jessley to talk more about sort of the impact on the community and your participation in our lawsuit as our star favorite plaintiff.
A complicated structure. We're not going to.
So the Latino Action Network versus State of New Jersey is a groundbreaking lawsuit that was filed in 2018. ELC, my organization, didn't join until 2023. So the litigation had already been underway for 5 years and was really, for several years, kind of languishing in state court without a firm ruling from the trial court judge on how it was going to sort of decide the case. It's really groundbreaking for a couple reasons. One is it's really the only statewide desegregation legal effort in really in history. There really have not been state court cases to desegregate a school system statewide. And so that is a monumental and groundbreaking effort in and of itself. The other interesting thing about New Jersey, it's one of the only states, it's actually the only state with a state constitutional provision specifically prohibiting segregation of schools. And that is different than every other state in the country. And so you would think that there'd be a leg up in terms of like, okay, the Constitution says it, so, therefore, automatically go to, well, what are we going to do about it? But that's not the way it's worked out in our state. We are one of the top, I don't know, depending on the study you look at in the data, between the top 5th or top 10 most segregated school systems in the entire country, including the South. And we have hundreds of school districts that, in which the school boundary lines are contiguous with town boundary lines. And so now we're going to talk about housing and education and sort of how that interplays
It's
to
what people
create
came for, Bob.
segregation in community and in schools. But the status right now is the trial court basically did not provide us the relief we wanted in the case, and so it's up on appeal right now. We just filed our opening brief with the appellate division, the intermediate court in New Jersey, not the Supreme Court, and we're hoping that eventually there will be a ruling that the pervasive racial and socioeconomic segregation throughout New Jersey's public schools is a violation of not only this segregation clause of the Constitution, but also the thorough and efficient clause, the education clause of the Constitution, because segregated schools do not provide students with a quality education. That is inherently not a quality education. It's not just a funding issue, even though we're the flag bearers for funding is an essential element of providing a thorough and efficient education, but it's also diversity in our schools. That is an essential component for this country, frankly, to have a society where students of different backgrounds can learn from each other and learn how to live in a pluralistic country. We need this more than ever, and so it's a really important case.
Do you want to talk a little bit about why the foundation is in?
For sure. So I guess I'll say when people ask me, like, what do you mean by segregation, right? Like, when we're talking about this, like, what do you mean there's segregation? And I'll just say that you cannot have Black and Latino segregation without white and Asian segregation. And you can't. and I'll say, history has shown us that segregation was not birthed in Black and brown communities, right? It is not an idea that we came up, so Latinos are not self-segregating. Because we get that a lot. Oh, well, you're choosing to live where you feel most comfortable. And I'll say, that is not the history of this country. You can't have Black and Latino segregation without white and Asian segregation. So that's number one. And when I say what is segregation, it means that 56% of Latino students, and again, I'm going heavy on this with the Latino for Hispanic Heritage Month, in terms of our struggles, 56% of Latino students go to schools that are more than 75 or 80% non-white, right? So half of our students are in schools with only Black and Latino other children. So that means that there are schools that are all white, and that we invest and support schools to draw lines to keep it that way. And while we have in our state constitution that all students, including white students, should be free of segregation in public schools, we have the other law around the zip code barriers. But to me, this case is really groundbreaking in the sense that it's really challenging us not just to challenge segregation like in law, but really in behavior and interactions within the school system. Because school integration is a very complex issue. And what that's going to look like and what those solutions are going to look like are really super local. And it's, in some states in New Jersey, it could take you an hour to leave a segregated area. Because there are so many dense pockets of what that looks like. So for me, this has huge ramifications for our community. We released a report in May of 2024 with the Joseph C. Cornwall Center for Rutgers Newark. I saw Dr. Payne here somewhere. And he helped us pull all the data from the Department of Education to show where academic achievement is for Latino students in New Jersey. And while we have some positive outliers of segregated school districts, that are still managing to perform above state standards. So there are some lessons to be learned there, that the majority of Latino students are ending up in hyper-segregated school districts, and that it is, in fact, we do have evidence and data to support that it is, in fact, preventing them from having a thorough and efficient education. Okay, so that the learning markers are there, and when we talk about the trajectory of someone's life, whether or not they learn to read or write well, or perceived as whether or not they can read or write well based off the school district that they went to, has a real impact on their economic well-being, their mobility, and basic, human rights. So for us, this is a integral issue in terms of housing and education, because first it's like, where do we live? And second is like, is my kid gonna get the things that they need? Because I don't think we realize how much of a child's health really starts at the school level. So when you start dismantling that or packing in several high-need students into one district, you're really setting them up for failure. And then that's where you have that. People say it's a school to prison pipeline. I call it a school mental health to prison pipeline, because that's usually where you see that fall off the map to juvenile justice, is anyone with a student with a disability or a mental health concern that goes unaddressed years at a time, or a learning need that gets not addressed years at a time, or you don't have the professionals to evaluate them in the language that their families can access the information. The IEP plan goes years, if not forever, without being addressed or implemented. So these things are really compounded, and really the solutions have to be hyper-local.
Peggy was waiting to jump in.
Oh,
Go ahead.
no, I mean, just to jump into that, and really, like, we're here to have a policy conversation, right? And there's a depth that we have to be willing to go another level down when it comes to how we talk about segregation, right? And the solutions to it. In the housing world, we have a small initiatives within the housing voucher program for some people who can get it, with flexibility. When a housing authority has the flexibility and the sources of funding to be able to do it, to try to help, create policies within the voucher program to help people be able to access other neighborhoods with that rental assistance. When communities, one of the tools within I'm trying to explain this in a way that's less wonky, but one of the tools within the voucher program is one of the good things about the voucher program is your voucher is valued by your locality. One of the bad ways to do that is to calculate that at a bigger metropolitan area. One of the ways that we've corrected for that is allowed housing authorities to calculate it in a small metropolitan area. We call it small, in a small metropolitan area. So that voucher, then the value, so then if you're only looking, and I don't know the neighborhoods in New Jersey, but if you're only looking at us, rather than looking like countywide, right, you can look by pockets of neighborhood. It increases the value of your voucher. You can use that voucher. The housing authority will pay more money toward your housing, because the fair market rent in that community, you only have to pay 30% of your income either way. It'll pay more of that voucher. It'll allow someone with a voucher to move into a more wealthy neighborhood, because the value of the voucher is more. Right? Those sort of initiatives really help, because what we're trying to really do is increase choice, right? We don't want it to sound like, because you live, sometimes we can make it sound like there's some number of black or brown people that you live next to, and therefore now your community is going to be bad, right? We can sometimes play into that. We've got to make sure that we're talking about this in a way that is about, look, we want families to have choice, so that the family whose first language is Spanish and they're making minimum wage can afford housing in a community that has English as a second language resources, that has the other resources that child's going to need, instead of being in a poorly resourced school that doesn't have that's not giving the child the services that they need. What are the other ways that we have racist policies embedded in in housing development and community choice that are making it so that families can't choose to live there, or zoning even around not having multifamily housing in different places that allow people to move there? Being able to get deeper into these policy debates and break silos so that we can all work together to solve the problems is what's going to be really important, because there's just so much nuance in how we truly transformationally solve these problems than the Band-Aid approaches we've taken for so many years.
So it's really great that you brought those two things together, because I was going to ask Adam to talk a little bit about that connection between the development of new housing in suburban communities, where the pushback is always, oh, well, our schools will be overcrowded. We don't mind the housing. We just mind the people coming into the housing, right? We don't mind that. If it looks nice, that's fine. But we're so worried about our schools being overcrowded,
Regional schools
and
for
it's this
certain
real red herring. I'm sorry.
I say that it's like regional schools for certain regions, right?
Right.
Draw that line right there.
And I think a lot about our late Lieutenant Governor Sheila Oliver, who used to say people want to live where they want to live, right? And some people want to live in a city, and they should be able to get the services and resources for their children if they want to live in a city. And if they want to live in a suburb, they should be able to get the resources for their families and children. But I wonder if there is not a magic answer to this, but I'm wondering if in the work that Fair Share has done, you've had a good rejoinder to, we don't mind building the homes. We just mind the people moving in because they're going to take up so much space in our schools, and our schools can't absorb that. And I just feel like that's a fake dichotomy and a very low-key racist excuse. But I'm wondering what Fair Share's response is.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do think a lot of times the objection is to who the people are. I remember this big fight we had early in my work with Fair Share, really nasty, long fight in Cherry Hill. And, and it was amazing. I mean, you think about these things, and I think you were talking earlier, Stacey, about the parallels to post-Reconstruction. I mean, we were at this planning board hearing, and the neighbors to this proposed affordable housing development, literally, like, the planning board's up here, and they line themselves up, in between, the planning board members and the leaders of the local NAACP and other community leaders who were advocating for the housing. And they were like, okay, that's fine. You can just sit here in front, and create this physical barrier. And then they tried to make a deal, which was, they sort of came over us, we'll stop objecting to this housing if you allow us to help to screen who moves in. We don't want it, we're just worried it'll all be people from Camden. And, and I was just kind of like, well, did when you moved in, did your neighbors screen you? I don't know, that's not how it works, right? I mean, and so I do think that a lot of the time it is a red herring. I mean, certainly there are instances in which there are districts that have to figure out how to expand facilities. There's a lot of districts in New Jersey that have a lot of extra seats too, and so, but you hear it universally. I guess the other thing I'd say, to flip it on its head a bit, is that I think the greatest benefit of what comes out of Mount Laurel is educational. I mean, it's always been central to us. I mean, we work for housing. For families, for people with disabilities, for seniors, for people in all those situations who are experiencing homelessness, all of those different housing needs. There's something I think particularly meaningful about kids who have access to housing. We were involved in this development that's just about to open. It's 112 new affordable apartments in Saddle River. This is one of the wealthiest communities in America. That's going to be 10% of all of the housing in Saddle River. Richard Nixon lived there after he was president. And that's going to be a really transformational experience for the kids who get to move there. And yeah, that's not for everyone. I mean, I think the questions about people want to move there. I mean, I once in Haddonfield, another really wealthy community in South Jersey, I was talking to their planner, and they said, I don't know, do poor people really want to live in Haddonfield? And what I said is, in my experience, poor people are a lot like rich people. They're not all the same, they're yeah. I mean, there's some people who don't want to live in Haddonfield, but there's some who do, because they're not monolithic, right? And especially now being a parent, I mean, I have young kids. I mean, I just think that is what is really transformational for, the environment kids grow up in and who's around them. The reason I do this work is that, South Brunswick was one of the first towns sued after Mount Laurel, and I went to a much more racially and economically diverse high school than I did in elementary school because of that. And that's a lot of how I got into this work, was that the experience of that for me. The experience of that for me is somebody who's Jewish, who was one of the only, I was one of a very small handful of non-white Christian kids. I mean, I'm white, but not Christian kids in my elementary school, and then being in a high school that was much more diverse, and that was a very positive experience for me. And it really impacts kids' lives.
Thanks. I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about how the lawsuit might interface with housing. If you're able to successfully desegregate our schools, what that's going to mean for not just the kids, which I think is a really important piece, but also what that means for housing options for families and individuals moving into New Jersey. Just because we are an incredibly diverse state, but we're also one of the, if not the most segregated states, not just in terms of schools, but also in terms of housing. So we have this real, we have a kind of we're of two minds, right? We celebrate our diversity, but then we have all of these barriers to actually integration, to actual integration.
I mean, I'll just start by saying that, I probably should have started with this kind of comment. I think when we're talking about these two sectors, we'd be remiss not to just say overall the powerful relationship between the two forces here going on in our country. We could talk about the deseg relationship, which is very specific soon, but just taking a step back overall, housing is so fundamental to learning from an educational standpoint. If you don't have secure housing, secure, stable housing, all the indicators are that your education isn't possible. It suffers tremendously. And we haven't talked about homelessness, but there's a whole federal homeless assistance and a whole program within the education department federally that is on the chopping block as well. But all of that powerfully relates to student outcomes, is stable housing. In DSEG, in this lawsuit, it's a longer conversation, but I think that what my observation is that even if we are successful in getting a positive ruling, with the hundreds of thousands of students that are in intensely segregated school districts throughout the state of New Jersey, you are not going to student mobility your way out of this problem. We need diverse communities. We need diverse housing options to increase racial and socioeconomic diversity throughout the communities. We need workforce development. We need transportation systems, healthcare systems, all working to increase integration in the communities themselves. So law is not great. I've been saying this for a few years now. Law isn't great at multi-sector remedies. But that is actually what's required. If not through the court system, then through the legislature. We need to empower communities to have the basics for people of all backgrounds and incomes to be able to be in that community. That is the way you will get integrated schools, is by having integrated communities that serve the needs of all people, of all backgrounds in those communities.
Yeah, I mean, if we have 565 municipalities that we're all trying to get to build affordable housing, we have 674 school districts that we're trying to figure out how they can work together to move towards school integration. So this is a very complex issue, and I think that, what if there was a day that people weren't like, should we buy there? Should we move there? Like, what's the school system like? You know what I mean? Like, I just feel like the fact that we have good schools and bad schools is the problem in and of itself. But I'm going to take it to a lived experience, because I feel like that's really to put a face to what the issue is. I am a product of the Abbott school system, proud resident school graduate of West New York Public Schools, and I grew up in a segregated school district. And I don't think I realized the impact of segregation until I got to college, until I realized what being non-white truly meant. And that even though I was an honor student in my school that I thought was so great, I didn't realize the mountain I had to climb until I got to college because my peers had SAT prep. They had AP courses. They had tons of supports. They had parents who could help them with their homework. They didn't have to lie about where they were living because they moved halfway through the school year. So they weren't like I was, frequently evicted, lying about my zip code, wondering if teachers were following me home, knowing that my school is investing in attendance police and whether or not you're living where you actually live, that there's a snitch policy, that if you tell that, I grew up like that in the 80s and 90s, and it's worse now. And it's worse now because now we have immigrant children who realize at the age of 16 that they can't drive, that they can't do things that their peers are doing, get jobs, be able to, all these things, apply the fear of applying for FAFSA, applying for college, figuring how to do that. It's all worse, and the educational outcomes are all worse. So for me, integration of schools, it's long overdue because the impact on students like me, somehow by the miracle of God, I made it out, but that shouldn't be the case. The case should be that we all believe that all students have a right to thrive, regardless of their socioeconomic income, regardless of their race or ethnicity, regardless if their parents understand the school system. It is our job of government to educate those communities to make sure that they all have an ability to thrive.
We have a couple of minutes before we get to questions, and so I just want to give all the panelists just a minute or two to sum up where they see things going, and if there's an opportunity that is not. I know it's hard to imagine things getting better, but they are going to get better someday. They might not get better tomorrow, but we are going to get through this, and we're going to get through it together, right? Because solidarity is our greatest strength, and it's the thing that's going to protect us all. And so I'm just curious if everybody has one thing that you're actually hopeful about in this moment. Hopeful, yeah. Hope is really important, right? It is really important. It's important that people. I know it's hard. I know we have to dig deep to find that, but if we don't share hope.
No, like I was talking about earlier, actually, the one thing that gives me hope is that white people are starting to get upset. Like this weekend, we got the No Kings March happening. I have the visions in my head of the white boomers and Gen Xers and everyone that are gonna be out there with their dogs and their grandkids and all of that out in the streets because I need white people to get upset. I can be upset. I've been upset. I have been there in the marches. I was in band. One of my favorite things is to march and yell things. But that's obviously people aren't listening to me. And people aren't listening to people who look like me. So I need white people to get upset, and I see that happening. And so that is what gives me hope, is the energy that I can help get my majority folks out in the streets about is what's going to be the change agent. I'll be there, with you, but I need folks who have been comfortable in this country for a really long time to finally get uncomfortable and be willing to go out into the streets.
Assignment accepted.
There's I don't even know if you can call it a silver lining, but because the federal government has so overstepped, to your point, white people getting married, getting mad, but also it has a way of bringing about coalitions and galvanizing and common agreement across multiple issues and sectors in a way that I think is, that's an opportunity of sorts. We can recognize the commonality of what we're up against and form coalitions, new ways of resistance that might not have existed before. And I think, who said, never let a good crisis go to waste, but I think there's something about crisis, and we're in, I was at an event last night, New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, and the speakers there, Brian Stevenson among them. We started off by saying we're in a new era of authoritarianism right now, of true fascism and authoritarianism, that we're all sort of still stunned by it. collectively, because it's been going on in so many different ways. But I think what happens in that crisis is that we rethink what we really want. We're reminded of what we really want and the importance of government to be a part of the solution. And I think in that space, there's an opportunity not just to defend ourselves and to just resist, but also to reimagine and really have a dialogue about how do we want things to be? Because we don't want to go back to the way it was before. We actually want to create something different and new. So I think there's an opportunity in this dark moment to realign and reimagine what we really want from society and what we want our government to do for us to create lasting stability and prosperity for a greater share of Americans.
Thank you. Jessley, do you have anything you're hopeful about?
I'm Latino, so we've always been hopeful because that's been the lifeline that gets us through, because the stack has historically been stacked against you. When you wake up and you know you're pending eviction and that your kids missed a bunch of days of school and that you haven't washed their clothes because you don't have enough money, you wake up, you play a little music, and you keep hope alive. You smile, you move in our humanness. And all the oppression, we haven't disappeared yet. The borders, the detention centers, the anti-Latino discrimination, the English-only laws, all you're doing is breeding more Jesselies for the future, and that's the hope that we have, is in building that pipeline for the future.
More Jesselies. I'm down with that. Adam?
I mean, to me, it's echoing Rial's, and it really is. And Jessie, I was thinking when you're just talking about your story about growing up. I mean, I think we have a lot of really good people doing this work in New Jersey right now, and who are, a lot of whom draw on like personal experiences. It's interesting. I mean, I've been at Fair Share for 20 years next year, and like I really feel like in the last 5 years, there's this like new generation of leaders who is, doing really, really good work throughout the state, and I feel like there's a way in which it all is like, and it's gonna be very interesting to see what happens in the gubernatorial election. Like there's a way in which I remember when Chris Christie got elected. There was a movement that coalesced that was very effective in doing a lot of things, including saving Mount Laurel. And I feel like we have threats no matter what happens, obviously, with what's going on in the federal government. And I feel like we're on the verge of a moment of more of that coalescing and strengthening from the work of, Jessie, you're doing everyone on this stage and so many people in this room, and that's what gives me hope.
Thank you. Those were great answers. Hope is really important. We're going to take some questions. So if you have a question, can you raise your hand, and then we'll have somebody with a mic come around. The young lady in the front with the white T-shirt was first, and then that gentleman, and then
Thank you.
The young lady in the red shirt.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angelina. I'm currently a fellow at the YWCA. But before that, alongside my friend Julio, we were working at the Rutgers Future Scholars Program in New Brunswick and Piscataway. So, yes. So I bring this up. I have two things that I did want to mention. The first one is to comment about like education, segregation, and all those things. And I say that because within the schools that both Julio and I mentored at, being Piscataway, New Brunswick area, we can tell the difference between the schools and the different populations of students that are there. And I feel like also when it comes to the idea of the segregation within these education these schools, you can also see how the stories of these families, of these children's families, how they keep rewriting itself because of how they're being segregated. For example, New Brunswick High School has a high rate of teen pregnancy. And they have a daycare in their high school because of this. And I say this because it brings back the story of their families, of the students in these schools being Black and brown students. So we see it going back to the same way their parents were raised, and it goes back to the accessibility, the opportunity, and all these ideas. So I did want to bring that to all of you, so you can be aware of that and how important it is to just keep advocating for those things, but also for the teachers, for the people who are involved in the advocacy for the education, because a lot of these teachers, a lot of these nonprofits, organizations involved in these schools are so understaffed, and they're not paid enough either. When summer hits, like, a lot of these teachers aren't at work anymore. So bringing that up and spreading more awareness of that is truly important. So that's my first thing. My other thing is, I couldn't stop thinking about the idea of school shootings. So how are these nonprofits hitting that idea or aiming that idea to prevent or bring more awareness to, like, gun violence? That's a question to all of you.
I mean, I have a weird hobby, so I was listening to a podcast about school shootings by the American Psychological Association a few weeks ago, and how in reality, like, children are really most at risk of being in a shooting in their community more than they are in a school. And I want to say that holds true in a lot of the young people that I've worked with throughout the state. Because people are more likely to, like, see a gun on their way to school or hear a shooting on their way to school than actually it happening at school. I mean, I think there's a lot to do around access to guns. There's a lot to do around the mental health needs of our children. But I think there's also, like, a bit of a fear-mongering around the realities of where community violence is actually happening for children, and the majority of it is still happening in their home and on their streets.
And we've seen the federal government step back from all of the community safety investments that cities like Newark have made to reduce gun violence and street violence, like enormous success stories in some of our urban centers. And the federal government is now stepping away from those. Bob, did you want to weigh in?
Just that, gun control policy is another one of those policies is so important to education policy and student outcomes. If students don't feel safe, if teachers don't feel safe, then the whole ecosystem suffers. And so I think providing safety, health and safety of our students is foundational to everything else that follows. So it's really important. It's also important not to have policies go the wrong way. As we know, the gun violence is proliferating, and schools are often the target, of people who have mental health problems. So we don't want policies to develop the wrong way, for there to be a type of security apparatus building up around school systems that then disproportionately target or cause our students of color to be swept up into these policies that end up excluding them from school or pushing them out of school and so forth. So it's both important to address gun policy for real, to create greater safety, but also to have policies that are attuned to how schools that become more policed, in part because of that threat of guns, that how that can also have a detrimental effect. So it's tricky,
Yeah, we police one way, right? I mean,
Right.
we already have schools with police departments in it, and I mean, I went to a school with metal detectors, so I don't think that's a common practice in like a white or Asian segregated schools.
Oh, I didn't know where you went. Thank you. We've got another question over here, and then the young lady in the red shirt, and then I think we'll have time for one or two more, but.
Hi, everyone. My name is Simon Galperin. I run the Jersey Bee. We're a nonprofit local news organization. One of the other things that I do is I study sort of and follow right-wing media and strategies they use. And we mentioned Project 2025 at the beginning of the conversation, so I just want to bring it back to that. And a component of Project 25 is a media strategy, is a local news strategy. And Robert, you mentioned a number of sort of industries that we need to activate to get involved to make New Jersey a more equitable place. So I wonder, for us, that's a question we perennially ask at every social justice space, every partner. Do you need from the press today? What do you need from media today? What are the messages? What are the questions you need to be being brought to people, and so we can learn and take away from it?
Sure, I can start. I think, the piece, I think, is I do feel like there's a double standard in how folks are measured on how they're impacting the world necessarily, right? And so really interrogating how much we expect of one class of politician who talks about how they want to engage in the world, and how we judge other politicians when we expect less of them, and then we go ahead and lean into those leanings. I think the other piece is to really interrogate the language that we use, because so much of in trying to appear balanced, we can lean into this demonization we're having of poor people and the otherizing of people. Language is so important, and it's one reason why we're all talking about narrative change and the narratives that we use. And that's not just a fad, I hope. I hope we're really doing the work to think about how we actually talk about people. And leaning into that, I think talking about people is really important. I think over the last 5 years, I know my organization has made leaps and bounds of trying to, instead of talking about like the cuts to Medicaid, talking about the loss of health insurance by people. Instead of talking about cuts to the SNAP program, we talk about people losing food assistance, right? I think the media needs to also talk in those terms of this isn't, because too often the language can be at a space where, again, we're talking about it as if it's an academic exercise, and for so many people, this is real life. So those are the three things that are top of mind: holding all politicians accountable to doing better in the world, making sure that we're not leaning into even implicit bias of demonizing people and the otherizing, and then and actually talking about the impacts on people either broadly or individually is just critically important.
I'll just plus one on that. I think the impacts on actual people and how it's impacting them is, I think, the most important thing to illuminate in this whole crisis that we're going through. The fact that the federal Trump administration wants to eliminate Title III in this country starting next year. What is Title III? It's all the money for English and multilingual learners. So that means something to so many people in New Jersey. And so what does that actually mean in terms of your education, your ability? They want students to learn English and only speak English. Well, guess what? Title III helps students learn English. You're eliminating that. So what are you really trying to do there? And so what is the impact? So taking all of these cuts to the human and community level is so important. And then also doing some insightful analysis about what do we lose when government withdraws and goes away. That larger story and narrative about the privatization of everything happening. Everyone is now on their own journey to pull themselves up by their bootstraps to get food, to get education. That's where the country, this party wants to go. So drawing sort of insightful stories about what that means in all of these different sectors, education, housing, and so forth, I think is really just, we need to keep approaching that at that level of what are we doing in this country, the richest country, multi-trillion dollar country, GDP, the richest country the world has ever known. What are we doing when the government is now withdrawing all basic supports? And so I think that, like the shock of that is something that we need to keep telling the story of until we reverse the tide.
I think, I think there's a real, with the gutting of so much local news, I think a lot of what ends up being reported is in the lens of conflict. And look, I come from both, my background is as an organizer and as a litigator. I believe in conflict. I believe it's necessary to make progress. And you know, and there's certainly ways in which that plays into things. And yet I also feel like that sometimes, especially when there's not really quality journalism, ends up, and not through the fault of the journalists or the resources, ends up meaning that, I mean, I think about like what's going on here in Princeton, where we have one of the council members, David Cohen, council president Mia Sachs was here before. You know, they worked really hard to come up with a pretty incredible affordable housing plan in a town that 10 years ago or so went on a 41-day trial over their plan, and they came up with a plan that really incorporated a broad swath of the community, partnered with local nonprofits, that, you know, really creative redevelopment. And, you know, like, that was a lot of work. And, you know, how much does the media report on that? Well, no, you know, they like to report more, I mean, on these people with these Defend Historic Princeton signs that you've probably seen around, you know. They're fighting for the lost cause there, and they, you know, and it's this the people with this really stupid fight about that doesn't really make any sense. And like, I do think that right now it's important to both report on the good conflict that we're making, but also like when there's actually progress, and to Peggy's point, the impact on people, the people who are now moving into all this affordable housing being built in Princeton, like, we're missing those stories.
Thanks. Okay, the young lady in the red shirt was next.
Thank you very much. My name is Leanna Jonke, and I'm actually a former kindergarten teacher. I taught in Newark, Trenton, and Camden at schools that actually required home visits. So to say that housing and education is connected is an understatement. I'm actually here with some committee members. I'm honored to chair one of the municipality's committees that focuses on affordable housing. I have the honor of being executive director of Princeton Nursery School, and it's a nonprofit preschool program 10 minutes walk from here that was founded in the formerly segregated Witherspoon-Jackson neighborhood. It was there for unfortunate reasons, but it was a thriving Black community and immigrant community, and many of those community members have been displaced because of affordability here in Houston. Where I used to, Princeton. I lived in Houston for a while, in Princeton. I'm fortunate that at our school, we focus on childcare. So I went from elementary school teacher to I supported high school students. I worked here at Princeton University, and I saw that it just got harder for my students to make those jumps, to meet those barriers. And so I went back to early childhood education. At Princeton Nursery School, we ensure that high-quality education is there for students and that it's affordable for parents, many of them who are working from low-income households to moderate-income households. Within policies, I'm very grateful that there's a focus on pre-K education for the public school programs to have access to it. There are a number of barriers, though, that not many of us can leave at 3 o'clock to pick up our children. So our school ensures wraparound support so that parents can really go and work to be financially stable and hopefully housing stable as well. I've listened to the governor debates, and it was only Jack Ciattarelli who said childcare. That's what he just put it out there. We have really had no focus on childcare, where its research shows the first 1,000 days of a child's life are the most impactful for the child and for their caregiver. And so how can you see within our state and potentially federal policies to have the focus on childcare the way that other states have done it in Connecticut and New Mexico as examples?
Hi. Well, first, I just want to thank you for all the work that you're doing in the community and your commitment to all of this, because even, you know, I don't know, sometimes it's just, yeah, just thank you. I'm really worried about childcare in particular and state investment in childcare, because at the federal level, we don't invest nearly enough. And I'm really worried that what we're calling like the federal fallout, so really broadly, right? There's all the things that's happening with like RIFs and reductions in force at the federal level. There's the delays of funding that states and localities are getting. There's the cuts that happen that are going to be happening as a part of the reconciliation bill that passed in July, right? States like New Jersey, for example, at least might have to pay $300 million more for food stamps, for the food stamp program, and that's not taking in all the potential costs that the federal government is shifting. And if New Jersey can't find that money, they may not have a food program at all if the federal government acts that way. And so the state is gonna have to start making choices about how they're gonna fill in these gaps. Health insurance getting cut, are they gonna try to stand up? Immigrants not being able to have access to benefits, is the state gonna lean into that? And things like education and childcare and housing investment are the things that are flexibly funded by the state, and newer investments that they may have to start to retract. And so I know that the state has had to make some tough choices in this last legislative session, and I feel like that's a cascade, that's the canary in the coal mine of the other choices that are gonna start rolling down the hill from the federal government when it comes to childcare. So as much as the state is might be trying to do around that, I am equally concerned about childcare as I am about housing and education. And I think, it's an example of why we have to be in community together, because all of these dominoes, again, centering families and people, they need all of these things. And so if we start fighting with each other as state resources face these constraints, it's gonna be bad, and we're gonna break apart. Is why it's great that you're here and that we're in community together, because there's work that needs to be done to collectively engage with the state to protect those resources.
Thanks. I'm going to ask if we can bring the mic to the gentleman with the hat in the back. We have just a couple of minutes left, and so we're going to do this one question and one more question, and then we're going to have some closing remarks, I believe, from Brandon.
Leo Davis, Green Light Fund Greater Newark. I'd have a question pertaining to housing and actually education. So which one would you prefer me to ask?
Asker's choice. Pick one.
I guess I'll stay with education. Actually, I'll go to housing. One thing that I see as a pattern in a sense of, when it comes to building affordable housing throughout, urban cities, because those are the cities that tend to need it the most. I'm thinking of a trend where, you have all these affordable housing projects being built within the urban cities, kind of like building like a replica of what used to be called the projects in these cities. So you have an abundance of affordable housing, and then you have municipalities who don't have affordable housing units at all. So I kind of I'm asking, and what do you see, or if it can even be a pathway to mandating or regulating that all municipalities within a county has to have some type of affordable housing units, so that the affordable housing units could be spread out among municipalities and not so congested in one specific municipality.
Adam Gordon on this one, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, we do, that's what Mount Laurel really is. So we do have that. The question, of course, is, how we actually enforce it and make sure it happens. I mean, right now, Livingston's building affordable housing. Milburn's building affordable housing only because we've sued them and well, with that. I mean, and literally, when I say building, these are places that are literally affordable housing under construction today as we talk about it. Verona's building affordable housing. It's happening, but we are also undoing, decades of resistance, and we're still facing continued resistance. I mean, Milburn is still fighting this one development right downtown, right near their train station, would be 75 new affordable homes, even as other affordable homes are going up. And so, it really is So, just to be clear, we do have that requirement. We are seeing progress. I was going to say, there might be a couple tiny towns in Essex County that don't have any affordable housing, but pretty much every town has it at this point. It's certainly not enough. And I also think we need to continue to invest in both, because the affordability crisis is getting worse in Newark too, right? And so we're pushing for building and preserving affordable housing in Newark, and also making sure all the places around all do it, and it all needs to happen together.
So can I just add also, I think, as someone who worked front lines for many years, the problem is that almost like affordable housing is already too late, right? Like the majority of people who need affordable housing are on the street. And while we have Mount Laurel for everybody to build affordable housing in their municipality, we don't enforce all municipalities or counties to have shelters available in again, anyone can wind up houseless. Most people are just one chronic health condition, one job loss, one child with a disability away from needing affordable housing or being out on the street. And I feel like by the time we talk about affordable housing, you're talking about people who are literally living on the street for years at a time, or surfing couches for years at a time, invisible. So I really think we also need to re-envision the way we think about shelters and shelter spaces in all towns, because anyone can wind up houseless regardless of the town.
And there's
you
just
live in.
two things very fast that I want to mention that we haven't talked about, since this is a policy conversation. One is thinking about cost containment strategies. So strategies so that rent costs, I'm not talking about rent caps. We know, like I said before, we know that we need to keep increasing with inflation to be able to take care of properties, but rent stabilization policies to be able to control how much rent can go up. And the second thing is just to lean in on what Adam said around preservation. We haven't talked about that enough. It's really important. We're losing more units than we could possibly build. So if we don't do more to preserve and invest in redevelopment and properties, we're never gonna catch up.
Thanks, Peggy. We have one more question over here, and then we're going to have to wrap it up. I'm getting the high signs. I wish we had more time for more questions. Obviously, this is a very important part of the conversation. So, Sean, you want to?
Thanks. I'm Sean Jackson. I run Isles, which is a nonprofit down in Trenton, and we're working on a lot of these issues, but frankly, we're dealing with that at the micro level. We're doing little bits where we can and trying to make impact where we can. The courts have been a great way to move things more quickly, especially on topics as thorny and politically difficult as what we're talking about here tonight. We know the racial and other pieces. So on the desegregation litigation, what's the remedy you're looking for there that you think could make a difference and help drive change? And Adam, on the housing side, is there something beyond where we are with Mount Laurel and the subsequent legislation happening around, especially around the zoning issues, to open up the suburban communities and others to be more friendly to, multifamily housing? Thank you.
I mean, just really quickly, I think, some of the traditional remedies for desegregating schools involve programs that would attract students, enable students to move across district lines. So you could have magnet schools located in places to attract students to school districts. You could also have revamped or reimagined interdistrict choice programs that would enable students to again cross these district boundaries, which is such a big part of the phenomenon in New Jersey, where the school district boundary or the school zoning is really what is cementing the student population in a particular segregated manner, school by school. So I think there's other school mechanisms in New Jersey. Our county VOTEC schools, frankly our charter schools also don't have to be limited in the same way as traditional public schools. So utilizing those mechanisms to allow greater movement of students, I think, is one potential remedy that could come out of this case. But there's also greater strategies around regionalization, addressing the school residency requirement statute, which requires this sort of placement of students by neighborhood contiguous with the municipality boundary. So some reforms in those directions, I think, are things that we could look into. But as I said earlier, I think those are going to be some limited strategies, but we also need multiple sector strategies around to really desegregate schools and to make sure that when we do move students, that we don't recreate the mistakes of the prior generation of desegregation acts where students move but they feel very isolated and undersupported in the schools in which they migrate. And so that's something that I think would also need to be addressed through a remedy.
And I would say absolutely. There's definitely like what we call donut hole districts where I say like if you leave the parameters, it's almost like there's an electric fence like at the border of that town. But definitely we consolidating school districts, right? Like having less of this so that there is more mobility. But the other piece with the integration is that we do have evidence that, particularly for Black students, integration doesn't always lead to better academic outcomes in the sense, especially boys around school discipline strategies. So we really have to re-envision zero tolerance policies, how teachers are able to engage in effective discipline strategies to redirect behavior, staffing. Again, if you grew up in white segregation your whole life and now you're a teacher in an integrated school, do you have the skill sets to deal with Black and Latino students? Probably not, right? So unless we really put efforts into training and preparing a workforce that is able to work with students, including Black and Latino students, that's also very important for integration.
Did you want to say anything?
There's definitely more we can do on zoning. I think that, Mount Laurel also produces a ton of market rate housing. There's people in here, Helen is here, New Jersey Future has been working on some of these bills about using office parks and strip malls, which we're also working on and supportive of, but it's a big political fight. It's all about the mayors want preserving home rule. I think that there is more we can do, but it's a big fight.
And I won't be able to sleep if I don't say out loud that this isn't just about multifamily housing, right? Building affordable single-family housing is really critical, especially for families with kids and multiple kids. So we have to be able to lean on that in that part of the industry as well.
Thank you, Peggy. Thank you all. Please join me in giving a big round of applause to the panelists, to the Fund for New Jersey, to Brandon. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to moderate this panel. It was really a pleasure and an honor, and as somebody who has been with you along for a little bit. This is really a great culmination of the Crossroads series. I've had the privilege of working on some version of Crossroads for, I think, all my entire professional career, from when we used to call it Agenda New Jersey back in the 90s, so that's how old I am, way back. It's really great that the fund puts this kind of effort and investment and time and energy and resources into setting the stage for what the next governor, whoever they are, what they should be doing and how we can all be involved. So I hope that people are signing up and checking the registration table and getting the Fund for New Jersey's information so that you can all be part of the civic discourse and our democracy, because power concedes nothing without a demand. And we are not going to save our democracy by talking just to ourselves. We need to be able to talk to each other and talk to folks we don't already know. So thank you for coming out tonight and being part of this conversation. It's really important.
Thank you, Stacey. Stacey just said everything I was going to say, y'all. Sure. Thank you again to the panel. Truly, I appreciate you all for spending your time and coming and preparing for this. So thank you very much to the panel for sharing your expertise and your wisdom with us. Thank you to Princeton for hosting us. You don't have to do it, so we very much so appreciate you making time for us and making space for us. So the SPIA team, Delma, Stacy, and everybody. Thank you to all of you for staying here. It's past 9 o'clock. I got a little one at home that I gotta get to, so I won't be too long. Thank you to Tara Dowdell Group, which actually has helped put this entire series. The staff at the fund, I got a new baby. Alana's got a new baby. We did not have the time on our own to put this together. So without TDG, this would not have happened. So thank you very much to you all for making this happen. And just, this has been a very important series for us to host. We will be producing a final document / report, sort of, summarizing all the things that we have heard over these 4 events. There will be some more sort of publications and media. Quick point, wait, well, Simon left. I was going to say about media. Media needs to stand in defense of democracy because they say that they're crucial to democracy. They need to act like it. But other than that, the election is just the beginning, y'all. Right? This is not about just leading up to the election and who do we vote for and what do we ask or demand for them to do. But that is just the beginning of the future of this state. And there's a great many challenges that we have to, talk about. We talked about a small sliver of them today. And even in the, entire series that we've had here, we didn't even touch on, the entirety of the challenges that face this great state. But we make the future, right? And the world was not made and packaged for you, right? We all make it every single day over and over again. And so thank you for coming and, spending your evening with us to have these conversations. Please have these conversations with your families and in your communities. Please stay tuned, to more communications coming from us. We will, there's nothing final yet, but we do hope to have democracy-focused events next year as well. I think we might need them. Lastly, I'll just say that, the state that we have is one that is often looked to, actually, in a lot of ways. We talk about the challenges that we have, but earlier we were having a conversation about Mount Laurel and, it could be better. And, Peggy was like, yeah, but also it is what every other state looks to, right? When you think about housing policy and what should be, right? And so it's a yes and. It's yes, let's celebrate the things that make the state great, and let's improve upon them even more, right? We can do better, we must do better, we deserve better. And so with that, I thank you all for being here. I hope you get home safe, and please stay in contact and in touch with us. Thank you so much.